I lived in a small town along the Baltimore and Ohio line, just outside Ellicott's Mills. It was 1833, and the railroad had only been running a few years by then. People were still getting used to the idea of trains, these great mechanical beasts rumbling through the countryside, faster than a horse and louder than thunder. Most of the folks in town either worked on the line or had family who did. I was a blacksmith's apprentice, and our forge backed up close to the tracks. We'd hear the engines every day, shaking the windows and sending the dogs into a frenzy. The train schedule was reliable. You could almost set your watch by it if you had one. A morning passenger train, a midday freight, and another run around dusk. Nothing after dark, not officially. That's why it stood out so much when people began murmuring about something they'd seen late at night. Something strange. I first heard about it from old Mr. Whitaker, who ran the feed store. He said he saw a train go by after midnight. No lights, no smoke, and no sound. Just slid by like a shadow. I figured he was half drunk, like usual, and didn't think much of it. But then others started saying the same thing. Always at night. Always silent. No whistle, no lanterns on the engine, no crew waving back at them. Just a long string of cars gliding past in the dark. The weirdest part? There hadn't been any trains scheduled during those times. I didn't believe it until the night I saw it for myself. And when I did, it didn't feel like something I was supposed to see. It was a Thursday night when I finally saw it. I'd stayed late helping my master repair a broken wagon axle. And by the time I headed home, the forge was quiet and the road back was near pitch dark. I was walking parallel to the tracks, close enough to hear gravel crunching underfoot when I felt something shift, like the air around me had gone still. No wind, no crickets, not even the usual creak of the woods. Just quiet. That's when I saw the headlight beam cut across the trees. But there was no sound, no rumble, no screech, not even the faint clatter of wheels. Just that white glow moving steadily forward, not flickering like a lantern should, more like moonlight trapped in a funnel. I stood behind a tree and watched. The engine rolled past first. At least it looked like an engine. But it was covered in soot, like it had burned in a fire, and the smokestack was warped sideways. No crew in sight. Just behind it came the cars, maybe 4 or 5, all the windows dark. No cargo, no passengers. And the strangest thing, the whole train moved smooth as glass, without a single bump or sway. Like it wasn't even touching the rails. It passed within 20 feet of me, and I swear I could feel cold radiating off it, like standing too close to an ice house. Once it vanished down the bend, the noise of the woods came back, all at once, like someone unmuted the world. I walked home fast, heart pounding, but didn't say a word to anyone. I didn't want to end up like Whitaker, rambling at the feed store and getting laughed at. But the next morning, I checked the tracks. No fresh marks, no soot, nothing disturbed, and yet I knew I'd seen it. The ghost train was real, and I had a feeling it wasn't just passing through. Word started to spread by the end of that week. A few other folks said they'd seen it too. Always at night, always silent. An older woman claimed she'd watched it drift right through the crossing gate, which hadn't lowered at all. Another man swore it stopped near his field and sat still for almost a minute before vanishing. But what really shook me was what little Tommy Hughes said. He told his father he saw names written on the side of one of the cars, smeared in the soot. like someone had dragged a finger through the grime. His father brushed it off. But when I heard that, I asked Tommy what the names were. One of them was S. Whitaker. I went back to the tracks that night, alone against my better judgment. I brought a lantern and my old hunting knife, not sure what either would do. I waited near the bend where I'd first seen it, barely breathing. Around midnight, the light came again, that cold white glow drifting through the trees. The engine was just as ruin-looking as before, but this time I paid attention to the second car, and there it was, writing. Faint, but there. The soot had been disturbed on the side, a long line of names. I saw mine, my full name, clear as day, and it was still fresh, like someone had just traced it with a fingertip. I didn't wait for the rest of the train to pass. I ran. I didn't sleep that night, and by morning, I'd packed a bag and left town. I never went back. That was 30 years ago, and I've kept quiet about it since. Most folks I knew back then are long gone, and though the railroad still runs, the stretch near our town was rerouted years ago. The old tracks now rusting, half buried in weeds. Sometimes when I'm near old tracks, even far from Maryland, I swear I still hear that silence. Not quiet, but the kind of silence that comes right before something unnatural arrives. If you ever see that cold white light cutting through the trees, don't go looking. And if your name ever shows up on that train, don't wait around for it to stop. I was living in Lisbon in the summer of 1833, just off Rua de Rosa, in a narrow flat above a print shop. I'd come from Porto the year before, looking for work and trying to escape the worst of the fighting. Lisbon had its own troubles, though, mostly the cholera. People were terrified. Some fled inland, others stayed and clung to routine, pretending not to notice the carts carrying bodies down the alleyways each morning. I worked as a typesetter during the day, and at night I kept to myself. My boarding house was quiet, mostly other working men and the widow who owned the place. She lost her son to the disease that spring. After that, she barely spoke. The city smelled like rot and vinegar, and everyone walked with scarves tied over their faces. One night in late July, I returned home later than usual, the streets darker than I'd ever seen them. The usual street lamps were unlit, and not a single window glowed with candlelight. It was like the entire neighborhood had gone to sleep all at once. When I reached the stoop, I saw the widow standing in the middle of the street. No shoes, no coat, just her nightdress and hair down. She was staring toward the bottom of the hill, toward the Alfama district, and didn't seem to notice me. I called to her, quietly at first, and then louder, but she didn't flinch. I stepped closer and saw that she was whispering something, over and over, like a prayer or a name. That was the first night I heard the strange sounds coming up from the city. Something distant, rhythmic, like chains clinking or wheels turning. But no one else was on the street. The next day, I tried to ask her about it, about why she'd been outside like that. But she acted like it never happened. Just waved me off and told me to keep the curtains drawn at night, in case of thieves. The others in the house seemed tense too. At breakfast, no one made eye contact, and one man even packed up and left by the afternoon, saying something about bad air. I went to work like usual, but I couldn't stop thinking about that sound, that slow, heavy clatter echoing from the hills. It wasn't just wheels. It had a rhythm, like something being dragged. That night, I stayed up late by the window. I watched the street below until well after midnight. At first, nothing. Then, just past 2, I heard it again. Faint at first, then clearer. A grinding of metal on stone and something that sounded like a bell. I pressed my face to the glass and looked toward the Alfama. The moonlight caught movement. Something dark passed between the buildings, slow and deliberate, and I swear it looked like a rail car, though there were no tracks, no horses. Just the shape of it gliding through the alleys like it had every right to be there. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I asked the print shop foreman if he'd heard anything strange during the night. He narrowed his eyes at me and muttered something about not speaking ill of the dead. That's when I started hearing stories. Not in full, but in whispers. An old woman on the tram said she knew a man who disappeared after following a strange sound in the night. Another claimed the cholera carts weren't always full of the sick, that sometimes people were taken, still alive, to keep the death numbers consistent. I tried to shake it off, but every night that sound returned, closer each time. By the end of the week, I was barely eating. I kept the curtains closed, but it didn't help. The noise came right up to the boarding house on Friday night. I sat on the floor by the bed, holding a candle that flickered, even with the windows shut. The clanging of unseen wheels passed directly below, and through the thin wall, I heard someone on the stairs, slow, deliberate steps, one at a time. No one else moved. I didn't breathe. The steps stopped just outside my door and stayed there for what felt like minutes. Then nothing. Just silence. The next morning, 2 of the guests were gone. No bags, no goodbyes. When I asked the landlady, she said they must have left early, but their coats were still on the hooks by the stairs. One chair in the common room had a broken leg, like it had been knocked over hard. I was done. I left that evening with what I could carry, and I took a room across town, closer to the newer part of the city. No one there had heard the noise. Life moved slower. I tried to forget. But just before I left Lisbon that fall, I returned to the Alfama once during the day. I walked past the old house. The windows were shuttered now, and a for rent sign hung crooked on the gate. As I turned to go, I noticed something wedged beneath the rusted metal. A round, tarnished brass tag. I picked it up. It had a number stamped into it. 13. Same as my old room. I was just about to drop it when I realized the metal was warm. Too warm. Like it had just come from someone's hand. My chest tightened as I looked around. But the street was empty. Completely empty. It was the fall of 1833 when I decided to leave Edinburgh behind for a while. The noise, the crowds, the constant distractions, it had all become too much for me. I rented a small, isolated cottage on the Isle of Skye. The place was quiet, tucked far away from any town, perfect for what I needed. Solitude and peace to finish the novel that had been haunting my mind for years. I had been struggling to write anything meaningful in the city, but I was certain this new environment would clear my head. The cottage was a stone structure, weathered by years of wind and rain. It was the only house for miles. The land around it was wild, overgrown, and jagged with hills and cliffs. Inside, there was only the bare minimum: a fireplace for warmth, oil lamps for light, and a few worn pieces of furniture. The only sound, aside from the wind, was the occasional call of a bird or the distant crashing of waves against the shore. It was beautiful, yet eerie, as if the island itself had a way of whispering in the silence. I thought it would be the perfect escape. Little did I know, it would become a prison. At first, I settled in easily enough, focusing on my writing every day. But after a week, things began to feel off. It wasn't just the isolation, though that certainly had its own effects. There were noises in the night. At first, I told myself it was just the wind or the sound of the house settling. But then I started hearing footsteps on the floorboards above me, even though no one was there. The floor above was empty, and no one had been up there in years. I began leaving the lamp on at night, hoping it would ease the unease. But the sounds persisted. By the second week, the noises were harder to ignore. They started as light creaks and subtle whispers, but then the footsteps above me grew louder and more distinct. They were slow, deliberate, like someone pacing back and forth. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, trying to be rational, but every night, the sound started right at midnight and lasted for hours. One night, I climbed to the second floor to check the attic, thinking something might have shifted. But everything was just as it had been. I even checked the roof, thinking maybe it was the wind, but the skies were still and silent. Nothing made sense, and the constant noise began to wear on me. I thought I might be losing my mind, the isolation finally getting to me. But then something happened that made it impossible to dismiss the events as imagination. One night, while I sat by the fire, writing as I always did, I heard the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open upstairs. I froze. The attic door was old and heavy, and I was sure I'd closed it. No wind, no storm, nothing should have moved it. Still, I hesitated. I stood and grabbed the lantern, my hands trembling, and made my way up the stairs. When I opened the attic door, the room was exactly as I'd left it, dusty and unused, with the same piles of old furniture scattered around. But there was something else. A large trunk, which had been sitting in the corner since I arrived, was now open, and the lid was ajar. Inside, I found nothing but a single sheet of yellowed paper, crumpled and torn. The handwriting was faint, but the words were clear. "You are not alone." My heart raced. I knew no one had been there. No one could have been there. I hadn't even touched the trunk, and yet someone had been. The next few days passed in a blur. I barely slept, barely ate. I kept telling myself to pack up and leave, but something, curiosity, pride, fear of seeming irrational, kept me there. I boarded the attic door shut and stopped going upstairs altogether. But even then, the footsteps continued. And then one night, something changed. I woke around 3 to the sound of breathing. Not from above, from outside my door. Slow, ragged, steady, like someone standing there, just inches away. I didn't move. I just stared at the ceiling, gripping the blanket like it could protect me. After what felt like forever, the breathing stopped. I waited another hour before I worked up the nerve to check. The hallway was empty. The door was shut tight. But something new had appeared. Right in the center of the hallway floor, a small object. It was one of my fountain pens, the same pen I'd been using downstairs at my writing desk. I hadn't brought it upstairs, and I hadn't left it anywhere near the door. That was the final straw. I packed what I could and left before dawn, not bothering to look back. I sent a letter to the landlord a week later, telling him I'd left early and didn't want a refund. About a month after I got back to Edinburgh, I received a reply from the landlord. It was short, just a few lines thanking me and saying the cottage would remain vacant for a while. Then he added something odd. He said I wasn't the first to leave early, that most tenants never stayed the full term. They all said the same thing, he wrote. They heard the steps, too. I was about to toss the letter when something fell from the envelope, a small scrap of yellowed paper torn at the edge. On it, in shaky ink, was a single sentence: "You are not alone."